This is the page out of the Joan Lunden playbook. Whenever anyone asks you if you can do something, just say yes, and then go figure out how to do it. And that's how I moved to New York City, and I frankly learned how to be a street reporter from my camera crew.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Time for another episode of Things No One Tells You. And this time, I am excited for you to hear this conversation with legendary broadcaster Joan Lunden. First, really quick, I just want to share that I am coming off the high from watching the Oscars because I always love to watch them. But I was struck this year by how much just female camaraderie there was. And I feel like you always get that, but I really loved, especially I think, because I'm thinking about the moment of all the actors from Bridesmaids. And I love that movie so much. But I don't know, there's just something so cool about seeing all of these women going up there, you know, talking about also maybe some of them balancing their job as actors and then being moms. I think that's really cool. So that sort of plays into this episode. But I want to give you the backstory real quick because this was an unexpected gift of a conversation that I was able to have. And the truth is, the library in the town where I live in Connecticut, they're really sort of cutting edge, and they have all these really just newsmaking, you know, people, like whether they're artists, entertainers, authors, what have you, from time to time come to the library, and they will give talks. They will speak all sorts of different things. And I've worked with them before, but they came to me and said, hey, Joan Lunden is coming. She's written a new book. By the way, it's number 11. And they were like, would you host this conversation? And I started reading the book as I was prepping for this. And it just, from the jump, it captivated me. And I know that part of the reason why is I could see my own journey sort of in terms of the things that she was talking about. And Joan Lunden is a superstar in the world of news. I mean, she catapulted in the late 70s through the 80s to the lead seat at GMA. I loved what I was reading in her book because it took me back to actually this memory I have when my mom, when I was a little kid, I probably was like in my early teens, and she took me on a weekend to see this panel in Washington, D.C. My mom loved to take me on these little adventures. And she was like, I want to come show you this panel of women who are broadcasters. And it's funny because my dad is always the one that I think about in terms of my career, because my dad was a sports journalist and I sort of followed more in those footsteps. But my mom was really the one that was, I think, finding ways to show me what strong women looked like. And she's also just one of them in her own, because she was an educator and was always working. There were a couple years that she was home with us, but then she went back and she pivoted, and she was still in education, but she went on to become a principal. And watching that journey was really cool. And what I love so much about Joan's conversation is Joan's book, and she explains this memoir and why it's different from anything she's ever written. And I think that is a key piece of why this conversation is so powerful. But she really talks about all the hardships that she went through, but the way that she made it work. And that includes balancing really early on when there weren't really working moms that you could see in TV, balancing the travel, all the things, all the hardships in terms of like breaking that glass ceiling as a woman in the news business. But I also love that besides the thing that no one tells you that Joan really digs into in our episode, there's an overarching theme that is very much a thing no one tells you that I can't wait for you to discover for yourself. And it really is Joan's new mantra, which is the thing no one tells you is that reinvention never retires. I also real quick want to give a shout out to Westport Library because I love doing these conversations live. It is so much fun to be there with an audience and this audience was really feeding into everything that Joan was talking about. And it was really fun to just sit there with her in conversation, which is really just that, and hear what she had to say. And the book is fabulous. I encourage everybody out there to read it. But for now, here is my conversation with Joan Lunden. I told Joan I started reading this book on a plane, and I literally like underlined the first sentence and didn't stop. This is such an incredible book, and I feel so grateful to be able to be here with you and to be able to hear more of your story. And when you hear all the accolades and all the things that you've done, this is your 11th book.
Yeah.
The story behind how this one came to be what it is is really cool. Can you share that?
Yeah, I never would, if you would have told me at the beginning of my career, just coming in as a journalist, that I would end up writing 11 books, I would never have even believed that. But sometimes things come about in your life that you just feel like you need to share. And I've shared a lot of different chapters, along my journey. I started writing this one probably about, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago. And then I got diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I put it down. And after a year of very aggressive chemotherapy, I wrote a book called Had I Known. Once again, sharing another chapter of my life and everything I could possibly learn about that. And then I started getting booked on all these different health campaigns for women. And I got the urge to write a book about women and aging. So I wrote my last book, which is Why Did I Come Into This Room? Come on, you guys you know that one. However, it came out on March 13th, 2020. Anybody remember what happened that day?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, my 6-week book tour got canceled. It still did well, but made New York Times bestseller. But and then I finally took this back up, and I started writing this book. And a couple things I think are worth talking about. First of all, I turned the first book into my publisher, and she said, "This is an autobiography." And an autobiography is kind of a compilation of all the things you've done. It's kind of like Joan Lunden reporting on Joan Lunden's life, which I would expect from you. Your readers want a memoir. And quite honestly, I didn't know really the difference between an autobiography and a memoir at the time. But she teamed me with a wonderful memoirist, and she said, they want to go into those moments of your life. And I stopped and thought about it. I'm a voracious reader. I love books. I love to read. I love historical fiction. I love mystery thrillers, anything about the CIA or the Navy SEALs, because I did a show behind closed doors where I got to deploy with all the different branches of the service. My husband called them my stupid human tricks.
By the way, those stories are incredible.
Like, landing on an aircraft carrier in an F-18 or jumping with the Golden Knights or deploying with the Navy SEALs. I'm really good at a cocktail party. But so then, we started writing the new version of this book, which took me over a year. And, I'd talk about certain stories. I got to share this story. She said, it is a good story, but probably people have heard about that one. I call it a postcard. It's nice, it's pretty, it looks good, but it's not revelatory. It didn't create a moment in your life where you had to figure out how to navigate your way through that created some vulnerability in your life. And so we looked for those moments. The hardest part was that means for every story I opened up, I had to lose like 5 or 6 other stories. It's got to be another book, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it became the kind of book that I like to read, where a book takes you to another time and place with the protagonists and all the people in their lives and what they went through. So I'm much, much happier with the fact that I took all that extra time and rewrote. And I got to tell you, David Hartman and I for 10 years and Charlie and I for 10 years never had the ability to fact check anything. We didn't have laptops and we didn't have Google.
Oh my gosh.
I have anchors now that see me and they say, how did you do it when you didn't have Google?
Right.
And
now AI. I mean, it's...
Well, for me, I'll tell you, writing this book, I was constantly Googling because I kept trying to figure out my timeline. So like I'm setting this scene in the studio and, David and I are there and I've broken my arm and it's and Al Gore walks in and, the conventions are going on. I mean, I'm starting this like, wait a second, when was the convention? Now I'm Googling. I was constantly Googling. And then I was going to YouTube. And I couldn't believe how much of my career was on YouTube. I don't for the life of me know how it got there because I didn't put it all there.
You know what?
it's like when your tapes started going to the network and you didn't know. And that's some of the story you talk about in this book. And it was like, how does it get there? It just shows up. But when you talk about that in the book, there are QR codes.
Yes.
And we were discussing this upstairs, and forgive me if you guys all know this already, but I think that's such a cool thing is that the QR codes, you go to them.
It opens it up.
And it opens up the memory. And I was saying that I loved looking at the video of you in Sacramento where you started. And I think a lot of people here probably don't know that you started as a weather girl.
As a weather girl, yeah.
And you didn't see news or TV news in your future. You were looking at being a doctor when you were a kid.
There weren't women on. I mean, for those of you who, are as old as I am, so you can remember, like I grew up in the 50s and 60s. There were no women on television news. I mean, it was really an all-male white industry, period, across the board. And the only woman I can remember was Barbara Walters. She was on the Today Show. Even she started as a Today Show gal. That's what they called them back then. That, ran and got coffee and ran and got copy. And then every now and then, like have a little fluff assignment. And then she worked her way into that. But when I stop and think about when I started, it was 1973, that first job. And it was only because a family friend who was an ad salesman at a local station said, hey, what are you going to do when you get out of college? Like, I don't know. And I was a psychology major. I'd always thought I'd be a doctor, just like my dad. And then I'd worked in a hospital right before I went away to college. And I found out pretty quickly that stitches and scalpels were likely not going to be part of my career. Psychology felt like it was about as close as I could get to medicine. But, when I stop and think about the time that it was, and this is why I hope this book gets into the hands of a lot of young girls. If you have daughters or granddaughters that are in their 20s and 30s, I want them to understand the timeline of how different life was for women. Like in 1973, when I started at KCRA in Sacramento, a woman couldn't open their own charge account until 1972. Wow. You had to get it, if you wanted a Blooming's card, it had to be your husband that would get it for you, and Mrs. So-and-so. You couldn't open a bank account. You couldn't buy property. So, I mean, it was such a different world. And the television news business, there just were no women in it. Oh, there was one woman at that local station, and she was on the noon news, but she was married to the owner of the station. So that doesn't count.
Wow.
In my book, that doesn't count. But, I kind of I actually just went on a fact-finding mission because this guy had said, you ought to think about television news, which frankly seemed like kind of a harebrained idea. And he said, well, in case you decide to at least ask about it, he wrote down the name of the news director and the phone number. So the next day, I picked up the phone and I called him. And this guy says, that Bill down in sales, he told me that you might call, and if you did, I'd be crazy if I didn't meet you. So he said, what are you doing at 2:00? I said, seeing you. So I went in strictly to ask questions about what the industry was like. How are they going to start bringing women into the industry now that the nationalization of women was like suing, everybody, trying to force them to hire more women. And after about 5 minutes, he looked at me and he says, well, clearly you know how to write an interview. Yeah. He said, I think you have something. He said, I want to take you down to the studio and audition you. I was like, okay. So I went down, he auditioned me, and he was very nice. He was very flattering, but he didn't have a job. There was no job opening. And he said, but we might start like an early newscast at 5:30 in about 6 months, so I'm going to keep your name. But as I did that audition, the weatherman back behind the set was doing the weather maps. Back in the day where you had a big black felt tip pen and you drew the weather front and you wrote, L for low and H for high. There was nothing automated back then. And he had seen that. He walked right out into the parking lot with me and said, I just saw that, and I'd like to make you Sacramento's first weather girl. There are a few stations around the country that are putting weather girls on. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. That sounded incredibly boring. It didn't sound at all interesting, but somehow I knew an opportunity when I heard it. And I said, okay. And he said, okay, be at the station at 5 o'clock on Monday. And I said, 5 a.m.? And I should have known right then. That was an omen. I was going to be on that morning shift forever.
I know it's funny. Melvin, my husband, was up there meeting Joan and asking questions about that because it is so interesting. It is such a small group of people that do the role that you have done. And when you were thinking back in this memoir and putting those stories and really going through that process, was it sort of like different things were coming to the surface for you in terms of just realizing your journey?
I'll tell you, my husband's always said, you have had the most extraordinary life. But what's so weird to me is that you don't think that. You think it was ordinary. I need to remind you, it was extraordinary. And it certainly was. But putting that kind of a life into 100,000 words is not easy. The first draft had 196,000, I think. And they said, no. I mean, quite honestly, this one's probably maybe 106,000. But it's hard, when you try to say, what do I want to leave? This is really kind of my legacy memoir. But I didn't want to just give you the highlights of my career. I mean, I wanted to take you into that journey of, breaking into an all-male industry as a young female. And then, getting the call, getting the job in New York. Now, I started as a weather girl. Then they gave me some consumer reporting to do. But admittedly, I shot up to be an anchor like within a year and a half. I mean, because there just weren't any women. And then all of a sudden, I get the opportunity to go to New York. And I thought, I've been an anchor. They're bringing me in as an anchor. But the job was actually Sunday anchor, Monday through Friday street reporter. I'd never actually been a street reporter. That who, what, when, where, and why. You go to fires and political things. And everybody at my station said, what are you thinking? How do you think you're going to go to New York City and be a street reporter? You've never done it. And so this is the page out of the Joan Lunden playbook. Whenever anyone asks you if you can do something, just say yes, and then go figure out how to do it. And that's how I moved to New York City, and I frankly learned how to be a street reporter from my camera crew.
Right.
And I don't know why they thought it. I don't know how those executives at WABC hired me knowing I hadn't been a street reporter. Did they think it was that easy?
Or do they think that the camera crew, because I've had this same experience in sports. I get into sports. I didn't cover sports. I was a news girl first. And they said, do you want to cover auto racing? And I was like, I don't know what a chassis is. Like, what? And they said, just get here and we'll teach you everything you need to know. But I relied so much on my photographers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then eventually when I got to Washington, D.C. and I was a sports anchor, Chris Kerwin was my photographer and Dan Buckley, and they were my guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they were my confidence. We would be going to a certain interview and I would be like, I'm terrified. This is the head coach of whatever team. And they'd be like, this is fine. They become your lifelines.
So I'm going to tell you that the first story, it was the first story. Well, first of all, I should tell you, my name is Joan Lunden. My dad was Dr. Blunden. And when I got to WABC, they said, we think that you should change your name. Now, I do remember that when I was a little girl and we would go into a restaurant and you would give your name at the hostess and you would sit and wait. And then the hostess would sometimes say, Dr. Blunder, your table is ready. It made my dad crazy. He's a surgeon. You can't be a blender. So now, all of a sudden, I have this news director telling me, when you write Blunden, it can kind of look like a blunder. You don't want to give the critics, a good route to go here. So I had to call my mom and tell her, I might be famous, but not with your name. No, I did. I started the call with saying, remember how Dad used to get crazy? I said, well, the news director here kind of feels the same way, so they want me to change my name. And I remember one of the reporters, I don't know how many of you watched, kind of eyewitness news over the years, but they put together this very ethnic group of reporters for the first time ever, really, eyewitness news. And it became the biggest hit ever. And one of the reporters, Gloria Rojas, she said, "I think you should be Joan Cartwright." I said,
Really?
"Okay, why?" She said, "Because you come from California and everybody watches the Ponderosa. Remember the show Ponderosa? And it was the Cartwrights that owned the Ponderosa." I said, "Do you think all of California looks like the Ponderosa?" And I went and I finally, after a couple of days, I'd gone on stories just kind of watching, and I got called and I said, "You're going to go on this story." And I popped my head very sheepishly into the news director's office and said, "Psst, I'm going on a story, so I absolutely have to have a name, to close the story." And there was a reporter, Doug Johnson, some of you may remember. He was sitting there. He said, "Why don't you just drop the B and call yourself London? People will, it's recognizable, the city of London." At that time, there was a big star, Julie London. And I said, "That seems pretty easy." It got changed in a nanosecond. I said, "Okay, bye."
Wow.
I mean, and literally, I don't even know if it took a minute to have that conversation. And I walked out. When I went to close that story, I had to do it about 3 times. Joan London. But the story I went on was a bombing and conspiracy trial because the Vietnam War was going on. And there were activists who were blowing up recruiting offices. And so I drove with my crew, and back then there was no videotape. Everything was on film. Cameraman, lighting man, sound man. And we drove up in front of this big, impressive courthouse in New York City. The guys got out, and they start getting all their stuff out of the trunk. And the cameraman says to me, "How many mags do you want?" And I said, "I don't think I'll have any time to read any magazines in there." Okay, so some of you know about a film camera. That big round thing up on the top that houses the film, that's the magazine. And he was asking me, "Do you think you need 100 feet of film or 300 feet of film?" So he just said, "Okay, so I'll bring a couple of mags." We're walking in, and I kind of get up by him. I say, "Herb, what's a mag?" I mean, he knew I had no idea. So he explained the whole thing to me. I mean, they almost fell down and peed in their pants when I said, "I got to tell you." And they realized that they had this newbie that didn't know, but they were so wonderful. And they taught me what to do. I mean, they literally explained. They said the next day they sent me to a fire. I jump out of the car. There's a fire going on. I'm the reporter. I should find out what's going on. I went over to one of the firemen and "How did the fire start?" Again, my cameraman comes running over to me saying, "You can't talk to the fireman. You got to talk to the man with the white hat. He's the chief. They're fighting the fire." This fireman looked at me like I was like a little sister annoying him.
That's so funny. Right. You have to wait for the
I mean,
PIO.
so naive.
But isn't it great? I think naivety is such an awesome thing. I love that you touch on that. Real quick, before I forget, what was your mom's reaction to dropping the B?
There's a moment of silence. She couldn't argue with it because it had happened to my dad.
Yes. And
And-
you teed it up that way, which was really
well,
smart.
believe me, I teed it up that way. and when she realized London wasn't going to be that much difference, but I had been in Sacramento and I'd risen to this very quickly to this top position on the noon news that was, winning all the ratings, and my mom got to see me every day. And then I went off to New York and I was on New York news. She never got to see me anymore. So she was really sad. And then I got Good Morning America. And once again, my mom got to see me, so she was happy again.
I know. I thought about that when you said that too, because when we moved here, it was from Washington, which is where I'm from. And so it feels weird, right? When that happens,
Yeah.
It's like a big hug because you're in your hometown and then you go to somewhere else. Can you share what Barbara Walters told you early on? Because I just thought that was so profound.
Well, she was really to me, she was my idol. And And when I was the first morning that they finally it was in the contract of David Hartman that I couldn't do any big interviews, any celebrities, any major athletes. I couldn't open the show, I couldn't close the show, and I couldn't be called the co-host.
And was it specifically that you couldn't, or
No,
that he could
nobody else on the show could do any. But remember, in his defense,
Yeah.
ABC had hired him from Hollywood.
Yes, he was an actor.
He had been a star on Lucas Tanner. He was a teacher, I think, on Lucas Tanner. He had been on The Bold Ones. He was a doctor. So he was a big Hollywood star, and they brought him in as that. So
And they had a different outlook, which I thought was really interesting from the book too, that NBC at that point was very much more the news division ran it. ABC was very much the Hollywood side, right? Entertainment.
I won't say Hollywood side. What I'll say is that they understood that Today's Show had been on forever and was very, very strong. And they decided to do an alternative kind of program, but still news. So what they did is they created a set that looked like a home, like anybody's home. And it was all in golds and oranges. And our logo was a rising sun. They had Marvin Hamlish do da-da-da-da, some nice music, not the news, da-da-da-da-da. They wanted to, we didn't call our experts or reporters, we called them our family members. We created like a completely different kind of program that happened to absolutely take off and win the ratings for the next almost 20 years. So it was in those early days that it was like a big deal that Barbara was coming. And she might have asked for me. I don't know. I don't know how I ended up with that story that day. And she was coming on to talk about some special of hers. After our story, she took me aside during the commercial break. And she said, I'm going to tell you something. Do not try to fight for equality. Now, this would have been 1980. She said, it's not there yet. We're not there yet. And not just in here, out there. Like, the country's just not there yet. And if you do that, you're going to end up exactly where your predecessors ended up, right out the door. This is what you need to do. Take every small assignment that they're willing to give you and make them shine. Just make them so good that they have to notice. That's how your star will rise. And she was right. I mean, I followed that. I'll tell you something else she said to me. Always write thank you notes. She said, people wonder why I always get the big interviews, the big celebrities. She said, I'll tell you why. She said, when I see in Variety that, somebody's been cast for a movie or for a Broadway show, I immediately write them a handwritten note. Oh my gosh, you're just absolutely perfect for this role. I can't wait to see it. Please let me know when it's going to be coming to, theaters. I'd love to talk to you then. She said, so when it comes out, who do you think they want to talk to? She said, I do that. I plant the seed then. And she said, and when you get big interviews, always write a thank you note. Cut. One day, David Hartman's off. And I'm there, and Richard Burton is on the show. And he's going to be starring in Equus on Broadway. So by default, I get the interview. I really got ready for that interview. And afterwards, I wrote him a beautiful thank you note. And cut a year later. Now he's on for some big movie he was doing. And he says, I want that same Joan Lunden that interviewed me last time. David Hartman hears, and he's like, what do you mean Joan's doing the interview? I've known Richard Burton like for a long time, like we're buddies. And they said, sorry, but Mr. Burton asked for Joan. So, I mean, that's those little things. I mean, I followed a lot of those little pieces of advice, those little gems that Barbara gave me, and they worked.
What are some of the gems that you have found through your own experience that are maybe things that you have come across?
I think it's important for women. And look, we've come a long way, baby, like it says, but we're certainly still not at a place where, there's total equality in almost all workplaces. I'll tell you that when Charlie Gibson came, after 10 years of being with David, he left and they tried out a lot of different guys. I really thought Charlie was the guy. He was the Capitol Hill correspondent. He was super smart, but he was just kind of like this everyman's man. He didn't wear how bright he was. He didn't talk down to you. I met him, I forget which inauguration it was. It was so cold out that everything had to get moved inside. But we both got moved to the rotunda, and that was the first time we met each other. And so I was a big cheerleader for Charlie, and he knew it. And so the first day he came to the office to like put his books and stuff in his office, he came into my office and said, I want to do this show 50-50, equal. Let's show America that a man and a woman can do this show as equals. And I said, I'll take that. And we were always that way. Now, cut to about 3 months ago, 50th reunion of Good Morning America. And Charlie and Spencer and I went out to dinner the night before. And Charlie said, I never told you. He said, he'd read the book. He said, I saw in the book that you talked about that day that I walked in and sat down across your desk. I didn't tell you that when I actually first walked in the office, the vice presidents and the executive producers called me in. They said, okay, we got you here because there's something very important. You need to immediately establish yourself as the alpha male.
Really?
You've got to let Joan know that. You've got to let the audience know that. And Charlie said, he looked at them and said, I don't think, that's not how I took this job. That may be the way they've done it for the last 10 years, but I don't think that's what we should be doing. And he walked out of the office, walked into my office, and I knew the second half of the story, which is that he sat down across from me and said, we're doing this show 50-50. And he was so right on because, that was 10 years later. That was almost like, I forget what year. What year did Charlie come? 89, 91, something like that. And he, and he stuck to that. And it was awesome. And our show just flourished when Charlie and I started. Yeah.
And the camaraderie.
Oh my God,
so
he's like a brother
key.
to me.
Right. And and that's what it takes to have, the chemistry equals a success. It's like that in sports, but in morning shows, absolutely.
Morning shows are different. And, your husband will tell you, you guys all know she's married to Craig Melvin, but it's a different time of day. You don't have your shoes on. You maybe haven't brushed your teeth or brushed your hair. And we're in your house. I've always said that there can be a familiarity with a star. If you're walking down the street and you saw Mariska Hargitay, you would say, guess what's over there? I know I'm a big Law and Order fan. But you don't go over there necessarily and say hello. But I was in everybody's living room every day. And when people meet me out somewhere, I got to tell you, even to this day, sometimes people will come up and put their arms around me and say, oh my God, I watch you every morning. I was like, okay. Haven't been there for 25 years, but that's okay. But it's just this natural kind of reaction. I remember the first time my mother-in-law saw me, and I was still on GMA at this point, the first time a woman came and wrapped her arms around me, oh my God, oh my God. And afterwards she said, she was in your personal space. I said, yep, welcome to my world. Because it's more of a familial bond that you create with a morning audience. And I'll tell you, when I left GMA, it was 1990, the end of 1997. We still didn't have social media. And to me, one of the hardest parts of leaving that show and walking out of that studio that day was disconnecting to the millions of people that shared their morning with me. And remember, back then, when I was on that show, there was ABC, NBC, and CBS, and then later CNN. There weren't like 28 outlets. We had 28 million viewers sometimes in a week. Like, that's impossible to have in today's world of television. So it was really, really sad for me to disconnect. And then Facebook came. And all of them started connecting with me again. I remember when my husband said, first of all, never bring that laptop to bed again. Second of all, you're not going to be able to answer all those people. And I said, I'm sure going to try.
You're like, I can write them all thank you notes.
Yep.
Wait, so what was it like because you are the queen of reinvention. And I love that about your story. But before you talk about that, what was it like when you walked away from that? How do you describe what that felt
Oh,
like? And was that hard to deal with? Is
oh
it after
God.
so long of, having such a high profile job?
I think about even like for years, like, the men would leave a job, at the
Yeah.
retirement age and has sometimes difficulty because that has whatever they've been doing as a living, that's kind of how they define themselves.
Yes.
But when you have such a public facing job, that is how to this day, I'm introduced as the former host of Good Morning America. Um, and it's also how you see yourself. It is your definition of yourself. And it was really vulnerable and it was really difficult. And I knew that everybody was waiting for me to pop up on the Today Show or a
Mhm.
talk show. And I actually got some of those opportunities and didn't lean into them. And I talk about that a lot in the book, which I don't need to all go into here. But I think it took until this time in my life to be able to look at the arc of my whole life and just to realize that that 25 years of such public, well-known, such a big career, and then I have the other 25 years after. But only now can I look at that 25 years where I refocused and I focused so much on advocacy. By the way, I did 10 shows since I did GMA, but people don't realize that because they weren't on
Yeah.
national TV every single day. They were on a lot of different networks. We shot one way up around here, though, Wickedly Perfect, looking for the next Martha Stewart. I don't know if you remember that one on CBS Primetime. There's still one on right now on PBS called Second Opinion, another health show. But as I look at this last 25 years now, and I realized that in breast cancer and caregiving and the American Heart Association, testifying before the FDA to get mandatory mammogram reporting, testifying before the House Ways and Means Committee in the Congress to try to expand the Family Medical and Leave Act to include caregiving at the end of the life as well as newborn care. I might have had even more opportunities to truly make a difference in people's lives in this last 25 years than I did in that spectacular 25 years that preceded it. And it was good for me. One of the real pleasures of doing this book was being able to stand back and finally getting to see that and to really kind of understand that and to understand the value that you don't always have to top what you were doing before. You don't always have to do exactly the same thing that you were doing before. And sometimes being open, you're leaving your mind open and your heart open to other things where maybe you could make a difference and have something to do that's really self-fulfilling if you're just open to it. So a lot of my book is about reinvention, and I love chapter titles. And one of these is Reinvention Never Retires.
Mm-hmm.
And look, we live in a world today where people are going to be phased out of businesses. Businesses are going to cut back. AI is going to phase people out. And people are going to find themselves having to reinvent themselves over and over and over again, like I think never before in our history. So if I can add a little bit of guidance or inspiration or motivation in that realm, then once again, I think I've kind of done my part.
I also, and I love all the men that are in the audience here, but I think that women are really great at reinvention,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we have
Not
to
that
be.
men aren't, but yes. But, we're multitaskers.
Whoa, are we multitaskers?
I know. So, to that end, how did you balance all of that?
Oh, it was a breeze.
But there are so many things that I want to ask you about because this is so chock full of just really fascinating, relatable stories on some levels. But how did you balance? You found out that you got the job at GMA literally the same day you got the phone call that you were pregnant with
Yeah.
your first child.
Yeah, the phone call was 20 minutes after the phone call from the agent. You got the job.
I mean, that
20
is
minutes later, congratulations, you're pregnant. And it never really occurred to me, honestly, Lindsay, to say, oh, boy, bad timing. That would have been so great. I said, all right, how am I going to pull this one off? And that's just how I've kind of always walked through my life, is just figure it out. And, I have a 4th of July baby, my first little girl, Jamie, and they wanted me back in August. And I remember I called my agent and said, I've interviewed a lot of people from the late J so I know I should breastfeed. Will you ask them if I can bring Jamie with me? Because I'm going to be breastfeeding. Now, just remember, in 1979, that was one of the words that the FCC said you could not say on television.
Breastfeeding?
Breastfeeding. You could not say breast or breastfeeding on television.
Wow.
And I was asking him to go to the ABC executives to ask if I could bring my baby to work because I was breastfeeding. Well, they just wanted my tush in that seat. They wanted to get the show kind of back on track. And so they said yes. I don't think they understood. Kudos to ABC for saying yes. I think that they felt it was going to be the best kept secret. I really do. I mean, they gave me the dressing room next to mine and put a crib in there. Put a crib in my office.
Look, there's the picture.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
that
that's
was
amazing.
Jamie's
Baby
dressing room.
Jamie.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so special.
And and then we had a press conference the first day after the show. And the PR guy took me aside and said, whatever you do not say that you have that baby upstairs. These are reporters. These are TV critics. They will chew you up and spit you out. They'll think that you will never be able to do your job. I said, all right, I really wasn't going to bring it up. So now we walk into the studio and it's packed. And David Hartman welcomes them all there and he introduces me as the new co-host of Good Morning America. And I open it up to questions. First question, Time Magazine. We hear you're bringing your baby to work. How did you work that out with ABC? Like my eyes shot to the back of the room where all the executives were, but I had to answer his question.
What was their reaction?
I said, well, ABC actually gave it to me in my contract that I could bring my baby to work because I'm breastfeeding. Print that. Second question, Newsweek. This show travels the globe. What are you going to do? I said, actually, ABC gave me permission to take the baby anywhere I go for at least the first year. And by the way, 9 months later, I took her with me on the Concorde to London to cover the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana.
That's amazing.
And I remember sitting at the inner turret at where they keep the royal jewels in the Tower of London, in a turret. And they had to pull up, like lines to give us electricity so they could plug in the blow dryer so that the guy could blow my hair dry. And I'm sitting with Jamie in my lap, ready to go down and see the jewels of London. I mean, it was really a pretty crazy, extraordinary life. And it was a lot of fun being able to share it with everyone.
That's so wild. My daughter came with me. I was pregnant at the Indy 500, and they wanted to put me in a 2-seater to take a ride around the track. And Mario Andretti was driving. And I said, I can't. I'm like 5 months. And he said, oh, that's fine. And I was like, what? So I checked with the powers that be there, and they said, no, it's okay. He's really good. He's safe. I was like, all right. So it's like my claim to fame for my daughter. I'm like, your son, your brother's been there, but you've really been there. Like you were in a car with Mario Andretti. But no, the stories you have with that's amazing. And that's amazing that they did that. And I love that picture.
So once I let the cat out of the bag, the next thing I knew, the PR guy who had told me, don't you dare say anything about that baby. I see him walking in the door to the studio with Jamie in his arms, all swaddled up, and he walks right down the center aisle past all these reporters and hands her to me. And that was the picture on the cover of every newspaper and magazine. It took us about 10 minutes before everyone realized that the story, the breaking news that day, wasn't who is the new co-host of Good Morning America. It was that a major media organization had allowed a woman to bring a baby to work with her.
Did you realize that moment when you were in it? Did it feel?
I don't think so. I don't think I can really honestly say that. And I don't think ABC understood the ripple effect that it would have across corporate America. And they really weren't sure how the audience would take to it. But quite honestly, the audience really they had such a positive reaction. I think they saw me there. Obviously, I had read my research. I was there. I was doing the interview. And yeah, I probably had spit up on me and dirty diapers to change. And that, I think, endeared me to the public. I will tell you something else that I just learned recently from from the guy who was the producer when I first went there, because I've been fact checking with him for the last year. And the other day he said, I never told you something. He said, when you really started a show, I got a call from the head of entertainment, and our show is under the entertainment division. And he said to me, you got to get that Joan Lunden off the air now. And he's like, why? Because nobody wants to see a pregnant woman walking down the street, let alone on their TV while they're eating breakfast, for God's sake. And the producer said, well, that's really not the reaction that we're getting from our audience. We've had a really positive reaction from the audience. And by the way, a really positive reaction from the press. He said, I got together with David Hartman and with the vice president, and we stood firm and said, no, it would be a huge ratings mistake if we took her off the air because she's pregnant. And he finally acquiesced and backed it down. And this producer said, so you stayed on the air until 2 weeks before you delivered. And he said, and we decided not to tell you that at the time. I said, I'm so glad you never told me at the time that the head of entertainment wanted me off the show because I look so big.
Oh my gosh.
And by the way, now you can have these cute little maternity clothes with a little baby bump. We wore tents.
They were like moo-moos.
They were tents. So, I get it that he was saying that maybe it wasn't so appealing.
But really, how did you balance all of that? You have 7 kids. What was your secret to making it work?
Listen to the mumbling. I've covered 5 presidents and 3 Olympics, but it's the 7 kids that always get the applause,
I love it. I love it. And look, there's the family.
Oh, yes, here they are, all 7. Now, they've grown up a little. The younger ones, the 2 sets of twins, they are now 21 and 23. Yes, we've had 4 of them in college for the last 4 years. And my older girls, who literally grew up in that studio, are now 37, 43, and 45. And 2 of them are married with little kids of their own. If you were watching Good Morning America last Tuesday, they were on the show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was awesome to see them back there. What would you say as you think back about your journey? What is the thing that no one tells you?
The 3:30 in the morning is really early. And do you wake up when your husband wakes up?
So we've gotten into a routine that he always says goodbye in the morning, which I love, except that sometimes I can't go back to sleep. So that is really nice. So that is one of the things. I think if that didn't happen, I would not feel that connection. So that's nice. But yes, so for a hot minute I do. But then I usually go back to sleep. But it's very early.
Yeah, boy, is it very early. And when it came to the very end, I was quite honestly just beyond exhausted, 20 years of sleep deprivation. And I was really kind of yearning for some normalcy in my life. And I'd met a wonderful man that I knew I wanted to spend my life with. And, I didn't really want to sign another contract. And I said, can't you find somewhere else to put me, 2020, something else that doesn't require getting up so early in the morning? And they wanted, nope, we want you on this show. And they got me to sign that contract, a 3-year contract. And I signed it reluctantly, but I then said, all right, fine, I'll stay. And 3 months later, they took me off the show. So it was... And they had to pay me for the next 3 years.
Right. So you're like, okay, the outcome is
all right, fine.
Right.
But you know what? What I built for myself after that was just an incredible life with a wonderful, wonderful husband. Mm-hmm. And we had these 2 sets of twins. And, now they're just coming out of college. And I've done all of these, in my opinion, different kinds of programs and advocacy work that has meant so much to me. And I've challenged myself. For a couple of years, I signed on at Lehigh University. And I taught public health and the media. That was really drawing outside the line, coloring outside the lines. And it was so much work. You have to come up with a curriculum. And you have these 30, 18-year-olds who have no idea who I am. And one day,
You're like, no, really.
one day I said to them, I said, where do you guys get your news? I said, do you get your news from television news? Not one hand. I said, well, I personally take offense at that. I said, so do you get them on those laptops? A couple people. I said, are you telling me that you get all of your news on your phones? Every hand in the whole audience. I said, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is you're going to close those laptops. I said, because I don't know whether you're really taking notes or whether you're trying to decide between the red Nikes and the white Nikes. So close those laptops. You are going to put some kind of a news alert on your phone. But I mean a news alert from, I don't care what it's from. It can be from Reuters, it can be from the Washington Post, it can be from New York Times. But how would you know if we went to war, for God's sakes? I mean, I was so startled by it. And so I said, from now on, this is a no technology class. And they were like, how are we going to take notes? I said, I will bring paper and pens. And the next time I brought paper and pens, and I said, every one of those classes I booked, I ran it like a TV show, and I booked a guest. My first guest was Anthony Fauci. These kids had no idea.
Wow.
I had interviewed him many times. So when I called him up, he said, okay. The next week I had Charlie Dent, who had been a senator who was from Allentown in Pennsylvania, to talk about how medical health legislation was passed or not passed. And and after a couple classes, they weren't asking questions. I said, from now on, you're going to take 2 index cards with you, and you're going to write out 3 questions. When you come into class, you'll hand me one. That's taking roll call. And then you be ready. And as soon as I would introduce a guest and I would ask the first couple questions, I would call on them and they would have to sit up. Would you please ask question 2? And it's the only way I could get them to
That's really cool.
But they had the opportunity to ask these extraordinary people questions. So, it was a challenge, but it was a great, great, great experience, a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. So I didn't do it after a year. I did 2 semesters.
That sounds awesome, though. I love that you thought about that and those guests that you had there are certainly incredible. I wanted to ask you about your advocacy that you mentioned. And funny story, when I met Joan, we were upstairs in the McCall room, and I said, oh, it's so funny. 4 hours earlier, I was there with our brownie troupe because we were having a brownie meeting in that same room. And my co-leader, Tracy, is here. And one of the things that we were talking about rainbows, and we were talking about getting through the storm that might lead to a rainbow. And one of the themes that I think Tracy brought up was about being brave. And one of your friends, when we were talking about some of the stories that are in the book and that, make you so special, is the bravery that you showed with the People magazine cover in 2014. Can you share
The
that
bald
story?
picture.
Yes,
Yeah.
The bald picture while you were going through cancer and getting treatment.
So when I heard those words, you've got cancer, I knew where I was going to I knew I'd have to tell the public. And so I called Robin Roberts, because we all know she had gone through it and everything she went through because of it. And she said, oh, you got to do it right away. Otherwise, the tabloids will have you dead. And I said, I know that. And she said, I'm going to have you come in. I won't even put your name on the guest list, because she said, I don't want you to have to walk in and everyone's going to say, oh, Joan, hi, why are you here? Because you're going to have a lump in your throat. And so they hid me out. I came in at the last minute and sat down. And it was, if any of you have gone through any kind of cancer or any kind of serious illness, just calling a friend is hard. To call and say, I'm calling you to tell you that I have cancer. Mm-hmm. And I knew I'd have to sit there and say it to everyone. And before I left, Robin said, I'm going to tell you another thing to do. Shave your head. Don't let cancer do it to you. You're going to have a year of chemo. You're going to lose your hair. Don't let the cancer do it to you. You do it. So that day I went back up to Greenwich. I did not go to my normal hairdresser because I knew they'd probably try to talk me out of it. I walked into a salon that I hadn't been to before. There were two young girls behind the counter. I said, I want to shave my head. And they looked at me like I was from
There's
Mars.
the picture. Is that?
Yes. All right. So then this tall guy, tall, dark, handsome guy took my hand and said, follow me. And he took me back to the back of the salon and he like pushed my head down and he took those buzzers, like you guys are used to those things. That's creepy when right by your ear. And I said, wait a minute, I got to get my phone out. I have to get this on videotape. I have to video it. And so People Magazine called and I've done many covers of People Magazine, and they said, we really want you to do this. And you don't have to do it, bald, but we'll see when we get there. They came to my house. We did one shot with a wig. We did one shot with like an Hermes scarf. And then everybody cleared the room. And I just dug down inside and I said, you've got to find a really awesome smile. And we did the shot with bald. And, nowadays they can show you on their laptop right then and there all the shots. And we all sat there and looked at that shot. And the editor-in-chief said, not only do you know how iconic that is, but do you know how many people will be inspired by this?
Yeah.
I said, go for it, run with it. And I remember one woman came up to me one time and said, when I got diagnosed with cancer, all I could think of when they told me that was that picture of you on the cover of People. I said, really? She said, yes, because your eyes said, I will survive. And that to me told me I will survive. I was like, all right, even if it's one person, it was worth it.
What did that mean to you?
I was a little worried that the twins were really young then, and I was really worried.
How old were they?
Oh, I don't remember. They were probably, I don't know, like 6 and 8 or something. And we sat them down, and we, my husband did most of the talking because, again, it was hard to even talk. Mommy's got something inside of her that's sick, and they're going to take it out. And afterwards, she's going to be just fine. But she's going to, not have her hair because this medicine makes you lose your hair. And they were really worried, and you were. I always worried about how my life and the fact that I signed up for it. Well, it's funny. You never actually do sign a piece of paper one day that says, from now on, every nuance of my life is fair game for the public. But that is what happens. But your children don't. Your family doesn't. And I always worried of how was my public life going to affect them. I even worried that they would grow up with a little bit of a warped sense of reality because they would think that when you're in a restaurant, everybody stops by your table and says, hi. And I said, that's not reality. I'm happy to say that they grew up into 3 amazing, lovely young women. The 4 younger ones kind of know about my life, but not completely. I think it still kind of astounds them when we go in somewhere and somebody fawns over me and they're like, she's just our mother. Because they didn't grow up in it. So it's very different to them. In fact, the 3 older ones, of course, have read this and have, checked me on all kinds of things. And the 4 younger ones now are going to read it. And it's almost like I feel like they're going to read about a person in history, but not necessarily their mother.
I mean, when you think about all the stories, and by the way, when you were talking about having your baby and the press conference, and I was thinking about, there's one QR code in here that I was just swiping through the other night, and it was the promo for you coming back from, was it having another one of your kids?
Yep.
And it's like a full-on commercial. Yeah. And these women, it's like someone in their home, and they're like, Joan's coming back. And it was, I mean,
and it was blending reality with.
Yes.
And I mean, I had to share that one. You guys are going to love the videotape in the book.
Yeah.
I just wanted, my life has been extraordinary and it's fun to tell, but I could actually show it. And that I thought was really, really cool.
Yeah. And they're, do your daughters or your kids that are very familiar with their story, did they talk to you about what a badass you are?
Oh yeah, my older daughters are, like just coming here, one of my daughters will say, "By the way, Mom, just remember, you're Joan Lunden."
Oh, that's
Thanks,
awesome.
honey.
What does that mean to you? You're Joan Lunden.
You know what? I mean, I've asked my daughters as adults if I had any kind of a negative impact on their lives because of, the demanding job that I had. And they all say the same thing. All right, so you weren't in the pickup line. Like, no big deal. You were at everything important in our lives. And you showed us that we could be more than one thing. So my Lindsay right here,
It's a great name choice.
who ran my company for 12 years, is married to Evan, and that's Parker and Leo. They call me JoJo. And over here, that's my Jamie. That's the one I took to work with me that first day. She's married to George, has 2 little boys, Mason and Asher, and my Sarah right there. They've all worked with me. And from right to left, that's Kate and Kim, and my very handsome, wonderful husband, Jeff, and Jack and Max. So Max is still at Lafayette. Jack got recruited to University of Michigan to play football.
Oh, nice.
She's Kim's at Skidmore and education major, and Kate actually is now taking her master's degree at Fairfield University in clinical social work.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of the update.
Wow, what a beautiful family. There's a lot more that we could cover. I mean, there are so many great stories, but we were going to open it up for questions.
But you and I talk too much.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many ways that you were a trailblazer. And I know that, there are stories in here too that are about just things that you've overcome and things breaking glass ceilings in many ways too. So all of that. But I realize it's 8:16.
That's okay. We still have time for a
Can we
few
do a couple
questions. If anyone has a question, I would just ask that you come up and queue up here and ask your question into the mic so we can capture it.
I think I see somebody here. Do you have a question? Maybe we can bring the microphone over to you.
There's a
there.
yes.
Can you go over there? Do you mind? All right. And then we'll be able to see your pretty face too. By the way, I'm a Connecticut girl. I'm from Greenwich.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here and to listen to you talk about your story and your activism. Do you still do any advocacy and activism? Because it's something that I am involved with right now. And, we do the book signing. I wanted to, briefly just talk to you about that. So I was wondering if that's something you're still involved with, because I learned that you were subjected to sexual harassment at work, and that's something that I'm fighting to protect people from frivolous and retaliatory defamation lawsuits that protect survivors of sexual assault, abuse, harassment, and discrimination.
So I'll take a few of those things. First of all, I've never, ever, ever before talked about any sexual harassment that I got along my career until this book. So I'll leave it at that, and you can find the chapter called Fire Island Fiasco. It was back at a time when I don't even think that the phrase HR existed. I mean, you really didn't know as a young woman who to talk to, especially if it's your superior that's doing this to you, who, is directly almost in charge of you. And look, it's still going on today, obviously. It's not beyond that time. But this is the very first time I've ever talked about it in the book. As to what am I still doing? When we walk through parking lots and people say, "Oh, are you enjoying retirement?" My husband always says, "Please just say yes. Don't try to tell them all the things you're working on."
Oh, no.
But I am still involved in a number of different health campaigns. I probably do a couple dozen speeches a year in a lot of different categories, whether it's breast cancer, American Heart, whether it's caregiving, whether it's successful aging, whether it's women's health, or sometimes just town halls. I mean, and I'll tell you something, when I was at GMA, I was deathly afraid of public speaking.
Really?
And people would say, what are you talking about? How can you be afraid of being in front of a few hundred people? You're in front of millions of people every day. I said, but I don't see any of them. And so I went on tour with Tony Robbins right after leaving GMA for 2 years. We did 24 speeches a year in arenas with 24,000, because that's Tony. And it was like baptism by fire. But I can tell you that I'm a walking example that you can turn a complete fear into a complete passion. Because I do a tremendous amount of speaking today, and I love it. I know I'm good at it. You walk out, it's just a wonderful feeling to think that maybe you inspired someone. So yes, I do a lot of advocacy work still today. And you know what? Charlie retired. I did his podcast the other day. He's looking old. I'm going to keep working.
I have a follow-up question. You talking about the topic of the sexual harassment and the fact that you're talking about this in your book for the first time, and the Fire Island situation, people can read about it. It is a situation that you were put into with a superior that you did not realize was going to be what happened. Why did you feel that now is the right time to be talking about those examples?
I was asked again and again and again as the whole Me Too thing came up. I would always be called, like CNN and different, like, do you have a story? I didn't want to get into the fracas. I didn't want to go, oh yeah, It just, I don't know, that wasn't me. But at the same time, if I'm going to tell my life story, I'm just not going to whitewash it and paint it as all like, oh, it's really all easy. Like tell the challenging times as well, and then tell how you kind of muddled through and navigated through it. And to me, that I felt that at this time, I felt that was important to do. Do you have a question?
Well, I have, a question. I am relating very much to what you said. I came to New York in 1983 from Wisconsin. One of those little girls, just trying to make it till you fake it, or fake it till you make it. And I've endured being the only woman. Even now in my business, I'm still the only woman in my organization. It's crazy. I had no time off after I had my son. I've caregived my late husband, for 25 years. Now I'm trying to figure out what the next part of my life is, and I don't know what I'm good at. And everyone says, well, that's crazy. But I see you grabbing onto these things, and how did you know what you were good at, other than that you were on TV for 25 years?
So sometimes you don't know. You got to have your mind open. I think that a lot of people hear opportunities and they sometimes think, oh, wow, that was cool. What, for someone else? Like, you really have to be open.
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of explore a little. You can even think back to what you were passionate about, what really kind of, interested you in your younger life.
It's hard to remember those days.
Yeah, and sometimes those things can be brought up. I mean, personally, I had always thought that I was going to be a doctor. I think I always had that little nagging thing in the back of my head that said, you didn't live up to that. You were supposed to.
Oh, really?
I thought, I lost my dad when I was 13. He was also an avid private pilot, and he crashed coming back from speaking at a cancer convention. And I think I became even more dedicated to that idea that I would carry that torch. And then I didn't do it. But ironically, getting breast cancer and by the way, I hogged all of the medical stories at GMA, all the health stories. Yeah. And then when I got breast cancer, it was like, weirdly, this gift got dropped in my lap that I said, oh my God, with my platform, I can learn everything I can about breast cancer and take my phone into every single appointment and share it with women. And it turned out to be this huge, we did a whole website on it. And so I became, from a patient, I became an advocate, like in an instant. And it changed my breast cancer journey, like really in the most positive way. And that kind of also changed the trajectory, I think, of my life a little bit, and pushed it over even more into advocacy, and if you've taken care of a husband as they've been ill, if you've taken care of older parents, like, these are all things. Like, I got into the advocacy for senior care, and for successful aging by taking care of my mom, and for learning, how much I didn't know about senior care when you all of a sudden get that call. And boom, you have to like learn about assisted living overnight, and that there are 8 different levels of assisted living. And so, as different chapters of my life that I've kind of gone through, and I've said, you know what? I should work on that. I have a platform, especially. I should work on that. And so I think it's from different things in your life that you can kind of open up. Now, as far as just aging well, they say that we need to be doing things that use our mind. Now, I'm a jigsaw puzzle nut.
Oh, I love
them.
puzzles.
And that does help you, except that I'm so good at them that you should enter me in a contest, because I could probably do 1,000-piece puzzle.
Don't you think it would be a great show?
Oh my God, I could do 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle probably in a few hours, which means that it's not as good for my mind anymore, because now my mind has kind of learned to do it. They say that the things that will keep your cognitive thinking really, really as good as it can possibly be is to learn new things, new languages. There's a million ways to go on Babbel or any of the things and learn languages, or to learn something new, whether it's crocheting or knitting or gardening or piano or whatever it is, and reading and joining a book club so that you not only read, that you then are with other people, because the more you can be with other people, that's the other thing. They say that the secret ingredients to staying, to successful aging, staying engaged, that means with people, not being reclusive, and keep on doing things that are going to create those new little neurons in your brain. And I hate to tell you, but the thing that creates the neurons the most is exercise. And that's one of the most important things, because that's what, it not only creates the blood and the oxygen going up to your brain so that all those little neurons start working, but those are the neurons that best connect to the brainstem. So I've done a lot of studying on this.
I love
wrote
this.
a book
I'm just
about aging.
one of your 11. Wait, what do you do to exercise?
Oh, a lot of different things, but I mean, and my husband and I, I got another one for you. So when I was 29 years old, you know what I'm going to say. When I was 29, I got married, and I married a guy who's 39, and we had 3 great girls, but it didn't work out. 20 years later, when I was 49, I got married again, and again, I married a guy who was 39.
Oh.
I'm going to give you a minute to do the math there, okay?
How was that?
I have a great exercise buddy. I got a great workout pal. Are you kidding?
That's so great.
And I sometimes run circles around him.
Yeah.
My husband always says, not that I'm looking forward to it, but I really like to be at your autopsy, because I want to know.
God.
I want to know what that little chip is that you have inside you that the rest of us don't have.
I do think, you know what, it's so interesting hearing you talk that it's like the reinvention. You've had so many different iterations of what you've done, but it's the interesting thread to me is, the news, the GMA, all along the way, the advocacy, it's relatability and the power to connect with people.
Yeah.
And the difference that you've made in all of those atmospheres is just so amazing. So
Thank you.
well done. This is awesome. I can keep going, so someone's going to have to cut me off here. Oh, I'm getting the wrap. Thank you. Wait, can I ask you one more thing?
Yes.
Do you do the borders first on the puzzles? What is your strategy?
I do the borders first, but while I'm doing the borders, I look at what the main different things are in the puzzle. So if I see a red barn, I'll start pulling all the reds over here. If there are people, I put all the faces over here. If there's a flag in it, like pick those out. So while I'm doing the borders, I'm also
Sorting.
I'm also
You're sorting.
sorting.
Do you use a puzzle board?
I use a puzzle board.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. All right. Joan.
But I don't keep them. I mean, I don't like put the glue or anything. And my husband will come in and he'll see me like, you've been working on that for the last 2 days. And you're just like, as soon as you're finished with it, you just like do this? I said, yeah. Like guys fish. They sit out there forever. They finally catch the fish. What do? They threw the damn thing back in.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
It's the
come
same
on.
thing.
Right. It's done. I completed it. It's done. I do take pictures.
I was just gonna
Some of you know I've shared them on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This
Thank
book is
you.
amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
I could have talked to Joan for 3 more hours. I just found so much interesting. And I think really for me, it was like, you did that then. The fact that she found out she was pregnant the day she got the job at GMA. And I did not realize how much of a specific trailblazer she was in that regard. So I really loved hearing that story. But also, I just think anybody out there that is feeling stressed or thinking about your worth in terms of the job that you do and what that means. I mean, God knows I have been there, stepping away from a place like ESPN to do different things and then feeling like, whoa, where am I? Like, who is Lindsay, in this moment? I love how she talked about the reinvention and also keeping the door open and the fact that why do we have to label something? And I also just have to tell you guys that in these conversations I'm having with a lot of different people and not just entertainers and broadcasters, but also athletes, I feel like that's something that people keep sharing is that what you do now is great. It doesn't have to be the forever thing. And when this chapter is done, maybe it's okay to just let it be done and move on to the next thing that's really like speaking to you at that time. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. I don't know, just my thinking, but I did really think it was cool how she talked about that. This next chapter for her has really already been so much about advocacy and how the amount of work that she has done in that space and the amount of fulfillment and satisfaction she's had has already basically equaled the amount of time that she had as a successful broadcaster, in the days before and during the time at GMA. So I thought that was really cool. Anyway, Joan, thank you. If you don't have the book, go get it. It's called Joan. It's amazing. Also, I would love to hear what you think about this episode and thoughts and questions that you have. So I encourage you to follow me socially if you don't, Lindsay at Lindsay CZ on Instagram. And if you love this episode, please like it, rate and review it. As always, one of our favorite ways for you to show your support is to share the episode with a friend. So for my team, we say thank you for listening, for watching, and we can't wait to bring you more episodes. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much for joining me. I can't wait to see you back here next week. Please don't forget, follow and subscribe to Things No One Tells You. And of course, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to leave a 5-star review because that's really what helps people get more listeners. We would love to grow this community. We are so grateful that you're a part of it. See you next time.